Hi, I'm Dave. Welcome to the Dave Takes It On news desk. Items this week include the Everything Electric show was in town. What did we find? Does robotics present a greater job threat than China? Tesla increases peak hours for charging. Is this the end of cheap charging? We also pick the best of viewer comments, good, bad and ugly. We look at the public charging scene to see what is happening. We set the parameters for the Fantasy EV virtual stock portfolio and select our first share. Plus we'll take a quick glance at the social media scene. And please subscribe if you want to support the channel further. Have a look at our Patreon and YouTube memberships to get behind the scenes content. Maybe join me on a video shoot out on location. Details for that down below. So let's start with everything electric. Well, Jonas and I headed off down to the capital. Oh, should that be up to? Anyway, we're out of our depth in the hustle and bustle, but the results surprised us. Traffic seemed little different to up north. The EV chargers with multiple bays were vacant, and a hotel within walking distance of the XL exhibition at a reasonable price and with free parking. Well, it was all a great start. It is always great to meet our viewers, and we were not disappointed, just quite surprised. We're really happy that so many of you came up and said hello. It is really encouraging to us to hear from regular viewers what we get right and also what we might better avoid. It was surprising because a good number of the people who approached us were in fact CEOs and CTOs, Chief Technical Officers. And that was really a sign to us that the channel is growing and establishing ourselves in the mainstream. Several of them were happy to go on camera, and they were most forthcoming. With such a wealth of EVs on display and for test driving, we obviously headed to the most expensive first. If only my numbers would come up, but I suppose I should buy a ticket first. Nothing under £100,000 was the mantra, so we found the Mercedes EQS 450, the Porsche Taycan, and, well, the one to let the side down, Lotus, with the Electra and Emea, which start just under 100,000. Well, just. Well, the Taycan really reminded me that I'm not a youngster anymore, and at 6'3", I'm not Porsche's ideal driver. Just about enough room to get comfortable, but yeah, my Porsche days now look to be well and truly disappearing in the rearview mirror. Well, the EQS had the most gorgeous and comfortable headrests. Strange thing to choose. It reminded me, I do need my beauty sleep these days. Let's hope their FSD, full self-driving, is up to scratch, because the car might be best suited to long-distance cruising, but I'm much more likely to enjoy long-distance snoozing. Well, back to earth, we met up with the new kids on the block, the budget models, and nothing summed these up like the iconic Renault 5. Yes, I did have one of the originals, and the all-new MG S5. That's for if you actually need anyone to sit in the back seats, like maybe your kids. Well, I can see the appeal of the R5, but it is much more iconic than practical. I seem to be missing out because people are happy to pay well over the odds for, say, a Fiat 500e Giorgio Armano limited edition for almost the price of a Tesla Model 3. Or maybe I should listen next time to my wife when she says, well, this designer label handbag is actually worth every penny of the obscene sum it cost me. These are great cars at a great budget price. Have a look at them. Well, on full display was a bright red London bus. Only the badge said BYD. Yep, this is fully electric, a sign of the times. But I was in for a shock when I walked back to the hotel, and all of the buses were electric and all were made by BYD. It's not actually the future, this is the present. Well, nostalgia is definitely what it used to be when I saw all my old cars absolutely shining on the outside and fully electric on the inside. VW Beetle, Mini, Caravanette, I had them all. And the one I missed out on was the retro Austin from 1928. Not a rebuild, but a brand new car designed and built from the tyres up, purely as an EV. Apparently, they are rather successful. They got a waiting list for that one, but other companies will take any classic car you care to name and just electrify it for you. That really is recycling. But the showstopper for me was the Formula E. I've followed the growth of this relatively new sport, fully electric racing, with ex-Formula One drivers in a world championship. It has grown from the early days where cars couldn't even complete a race distance, and that was a shorter one for EVs. So they introduced car swaps in the pits at the halfway point, jump out of a flat battery into a full battery. Well, today they're on the cusp of being able to race a full F1 circuit for a full race distance. And I find they charge it all through a standard CCS2 socket on the back. Well, there's so much more, but that would be spoiling future videos. Subscribe so you don't miss any of them. I get a large number of messages and comments about Tesla superchargers changing the hours designated as peak, which are at the higher price, and off-peak, which are at the lower price. I get repeatedly asked, is this the end of cheap EV charging for us Tesla owners? Well, to answer that, just look back at the purpose of building the Tesla supercharger network in the first place. Tesla knew that people would never buy EVs in any number if they couldn't use them like a normal car. If going on holiday meant sitting in the UK motorway services with a queue, all waiting for a single dual bay 50 kilowatt DC charger for hours at a time, then why would they buy one? So a superb, reliable network was an essential feature of a successful EV manufacturing company. For proof, just look at the support that Legacy Auto gave to public charging in the early days, and look at the results in their new EV sales. Tesla sales are heading up towards 2 million. They were anyhow. The once mighty Ford is struggling to get up to 100,000. Well, to sell EVs in numbers, people need to be able to use them as easily as an ICE, and in addition, offer them something extra. Now, with most EVs, that's first of all silence, performance, they do go quickly, and features. But finally, Legacy Auto have realised they need a charging infrastructure as well. Yeah, better late than never. Superchargers now operate in the UK as the largest ultra-rapid network, and the open-to-all superchargers are also now approaching the second largest network in their own right. It has nearly 100 locations open to all. Each of those has around, 8 or 10 chargers on average. They have well over 1,000 and they're all ultra rapid. See, while GridServe and Install claim to have more chargers, in some ways, both of them have many of the older rapid chargers hovering around the 50 kilowatt DC power, and also have a large number of fast chargers with power down at about 11 kilowatts, sometimes 22. Well, we now come to the crux of the problem. Tesco has built and operates a large network of stores all around the UK, but I often go there and I find a queue at the checkouts. Likewise with fast food restaurants, and post offices, doctors and pharmacies. It doesn't matter how many you build or how many you open, there will be times when you have queues. And if you approach any of these to ask why don't they build more so you never have to queue, well, I guess you can imagine the answer you would get. There is actually an optimum number of stores or pharmacies or coffee shops that makes sense in a business model. To just build more and more stores until no store anywhere ever has queues would be ludicrous and a business disaster, because most of them would then stand almost empty, losing money for a very high proportion of the opening hours. Exactly the same applies to EV public chargers. You cannot just keep adding more and more until nobody ever can find a charging location full. The current occupancy rate does vary wildly, but it's reported on average to be around about 20 or 30%. Well, that range also matches my findings when I go out and film chargers of any other CPO other than Tesla. I rarely find any of them totally full. Most are pretty much deserted all the time. When they are full, bank holidays for example, so also are the motorway services, and so are the petrol pumps, and so are McDonald's and supermarkets, and even the car parks. Well, indeed, so are the roads, as many multi-mile traffic jams would confirm. That is the lesson to be learned. Our roads cope pretty well almost all the time. At rush hour, they get really busy, and at peak holiday times, they clog up totally and cannot cope. If we have the choice, most of us simply try to time our journeys when the roads are likely to be quieter. I will remember us as a family getting up at ridiculous o'clock for our annual holiday drive down to Cornwall to beat the traffic. Well, this was in the days before motorways existed in Devon and Cornwall. Well, in fact, Cornwall still does not have a single mile of motorway even today. So most of us, we adapt. For shopping, most of us, not all, avoid 5 p.m. on a Friday. For driving, many of us will try to set off either earlier on a bank holiday or later. And for food, few of us will by choice battle our way through huge crowds in the fast food restaurants, only to find there's no available seats to sit and eat your meal. We adapt. If the entire public charging network stands almost empty for 50, 60, 70% of each day and is just rather busy for another 20 or 30%, why do we still have queues? Well, I know from past experience my comment section will now fill up with, "Oh, it's all right for you, you're rich, you're retired, etc., etc." But that's just not the point. There are 168 hours in a week, and the average EV owner who cannot charge at home fills up just once a week for about 30 or 40 minutes. Why do the major CPOs like GridServe, Ionity, Fastnet have web pages showing when they are busy and to avoid them and when they're deserted to use them? And why do so many EV drivers still turn up there during busy times and find a queue? If you're on business, yes. Everyone else, why? Well, Tesla is an outlier in that their occupancy rate is far, far higher than the national average. The idle fees they charge indicate they expect them to be. Oh, by the way, those fees generally only are applied if the occupancy of the supercharger is 50% and above. We don't see those idle fees on Shell recharge locations with a price of 89 pence per kilowatt hour. It's my belief that the Tesla peak hours change reflects two major factors. First, that if people would explore the possibility of charging at different times, it will help the overall EV industry. Second, it will ease the load on the national grid of whatever country they're operating in. See, the grid does not have a steady load or demand throughout any 24-hour period. At peak times, it's chaotic, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And the grid often or usually struggles to cope. Oh, by the way, AI centres have now overtaken the load that charging EVs now consumes. That is why several huge AI data centres are now building their own dedicated power stations. Well, back to EVs, money talks. If Tesla charges 50p in peak hours but reduces that to 40p after 6 o'clock and then down to 24p after midnight, some Tesla drivers who can't charge at home will take advantage of that cost saving. Some. 50 kilowatt charge at 50p is 25 quid. 50 kilowatt charge at 24p is 12 quid. No compulsion, just plain money saving. If just 10 or 20% of Tesla drivers who can actually change their habit and charge before 9 a.m. or after 8 p.m, then the grid benefits and those drivers will rarely find they have to queue or even power share like you would on the older V2 chargers. But if you have no choice or you choose to pay the higher rate, just realise it is still likely to be the cheapest you can find wherever you are. Tesla, like Tesco, will never keep adding new superchargers until queues cannot possibly happen. If you can help, do so. If you can't, don't. Have we taken our eyes off the ball when we blame China for job losses? See, way back in the 70s, my youth, employment in the motor industry soared to around 500,000 skilled, well-paid jobs directly in auto manufacturing. It is important to realise that there are significantly more employed in the support industries, the services, the garages, the car accessory shops, petrol stations, and many others. Those 500,000 workers were making almost 2 million new cars a year. It was a peak for the UK motor industry that has since never been matched. Yeah, I know that by pure coincidence 2024 saw 1.9 million new cars sold in the UK. But of those, we only manufactured about 750,000. The rest were imported in one piece or in pieces and assembled here. So where have all the jobs gone? Well, the answer is simply robots. The process began way back in the 70s as more and more production tasks became automated. Today we're pretty much at a peak. Or are we? Robotic production machines like presses and welders and spray booths have a single problem. They're bolted to the floor. We humans aren't, so we have an advantage in mobility and we have a purpose in car manufacturing. We are much more mobile and adaptable. But now that advantage looks to have given way to the robots, this time humanoid robots. Yeah, we've all seen the Optimus robot from Tesla, but most manufacturers are developing or sourcing their own. It is the last vestige of the mass employment that we once enjoyed. See, a person can only work about 8 or so hours a day and 5 or 6 days a week. Yet there are 168 hours a week and 365 days a year. To cover that, using humans would need to employ more than half a dozen people. Yeah, you got things like split shifts, different holidays, sickness, lunch, tea breaks, etc. Or one robot. Yeah, I know people say they need to recharge. Yeah, but the batteries are relatively tiny. They average about 3 kilowatt hours. And besides, the robot can be carrying out a task while plugged in. Certain of the processes or tasks may be static already in nature and do not involve movement at all, while others will not. Then, while pesky humans want paying each week or month, a robot only needs to be bought once. Well, it looks like prices are heading down into the £20,000 to £50,000 range, and the Tesla Optimus is claimed to launch in the mid-20,000s. So let's give a one-off payment of £25,000. You could get 10 years of continuous operation with just the cost of electricity, and that can easily be generated for free by solar PV. So do the maths. Or math, as they say in America, and see why this is such a threat. 10 years, 52 weeks, 168 hours, that's 87,000 hours of labour. So a £25,000 robot will work for, get ready, 0.000287 per hour. Probably much less. It's not even a penny. I think it's more like 3/100ths of a penny per hour. Plus, you can program all your robots to do everything. You don't need to train or retrain them. If you have a sudden rush on, say, battery assembly, any available robot who's free can just go and do that. No retraining needed. Whatever labour cost goes into a modern new car, be it ICE or EV or hybrid, then the labour cost is about to reduce down to almost absolute zero. The biggest threat to employment today will come from humanoid robots. A quick glance through the comments section, which is rather lively as always. And for a good comment, I find Roger Froud 300. He asks why hotels like Travelodge and Premier Inn don't install cheap fast chargers for use overnight for guests. Yeah, totally agree with you, Roger. And in fact, I launched a video over 6 months ago about the M56 Chester East Services, which has a hotel called Super 8, and they do operate their own chargers. 11 kilowatts if I am not mistaken, and they have a number of these, and one will be allocated to you on request. It's yours. It was proposed they'd be free of charge. That would be included in the room price. Don't hold me to that, things change. It is yours for the duration of the stay, so if you're there 2 or 3 days, you get continuous charging on demand, and obviously the night before you set off, check out, just top right up to the 100%. Thanks for the comment, Roger. Well, the bad comments still plague us. Many viewers like Stephen McDonald 9619, who has carefully calculated the cost of charging his car. But despite obviously doing some research and spending some time making his comments, he seems to have overlooked a few basic facts. First, he uses a price per kilowatt hour of 85 pence. Wonder why he chose that one when the vast majority of EV drivers find that laughable. That's like filling up a petrol car every time at a motorway services and paying the 30 pence a litre extra they would charge you. We EV drivers just don't do it, and I personally never do. As a Tesla owner, I rarely get anywhere near even half of that, but the glaring error here is when he states that we all have 200 kilowatt hour batteries and they're all empty. Okay. Well, first, there are none. None of that size in the UK at all. Zero. They don't exist. Second, the average size is around 50 kilowatt hours. That's a quarter of his guess. Then, of course, most people do not run their battery totally flat and top it up to 100% every single time. Most people will top up 30 or 40 kilowatt hours on an average charging session. Well, he then accuses me of secretly having a V8 or V12 as my proper car. Really? My Model S is faster than those old gas-guzzling, toxic, carcinogenic-spewing exhaust monsters that pour out decibels that are officially damaging to human hearing and as assault on the senses. Yeah, that's you, Lambos and Ferraris. I mean you. Does he even know anything? Most of us now drive an EV for environmental reasons and just enjoy the really cheap off-peak home charging at about 7 pence a kilowatt hour, not 85. Well, the downright ugly comes from Neil Fox 4721 with a new, made-up scaremongering invention. He debunks ultra-fast EV charging in just 5 minutes, even though it already exists. Using 1 megawatt chargers that he states each will need their own power station. They don't. Never let the facts get in the way of a good scary story. But he then adds, in the health scare, we are all going to fry our brains if we sit in our cars and charge. Well, besides the obvious, we have safety standards. I believe that a 20-minute exposure while I'm charging is nowhere near as much exposure as what he lives with almost every single hour of each and every day. See, at home, he has an incoming mains electricity supply. That's approximately 23 kilowatts, and that's there in the background, in the house, 24/365. Then a number of new housing estates, because the land's so cheap, they now build under or near electricity pylons. These carry 110,000 volts and more, yet he seems totally unconcerned about them. Maybe he has one near him, and maybe he might take an interest in that. Yeah, EMF is an issue, but to suggest that it's worse than 110,000 volts AC flowing in overhead cables or 23 kilowatts pulsing AC through his house 24/7, it's a sad reflection on the sheer depths that people will stoop to try to prove their predetermined, prejudice, out-of-date opinions. Or is he just out to scare me? Failed. Public charging seems to be taking a hit at the moment. It would seem that the National Grid, in a bid to make more money for their executives, directors and shareholders, they've taken to charging extortionate figures for continuity of supply. It goes a bit like, we will provide you with 1 megawatt supply for your chargers, but in peak times, we may not be able to do that. We may have to send it elsewhere and you'll get little or none. But if you want us to send it all to you when we're struggling to do our job properly and supply the whole country with ample power, then you're going to have to pay us an extra fee. Sounds to me like the old football ground con prevalent in my youth. Mind your car, mister, knowing that if you don't pay up, the youngster you refuse to pay is likely to be the one that you should be afraid of. Well, they also discovered that they are not subject to regulation like we customers. Our unit prices are capped. But as we found out, our standing charges are not. Remember the days when they were less than 15, maybe 20 pence a day? What is it now? It's around 50p for most people, because they can. Well, one CPO we spoke to recently now pays £22,000 standing charges, which is a massive increase on previous years. Well, as a result of this and other abysmal practices, EV public charging prices have risen generally. Osprey and GridServe now have tariffs that have shot over 80 pence, and even EV on the Move has rocketed from 65 to 72. But our time in the Everything Electric exhibition has given us an amazing insight into a different and, very much cheaper way for CPOs of getting their electricity. You need to watch out for that video, due out later this month, or maybe subscribe, click the notification bell, we'll notify you. Well, it really is time someone sorted out the financial monopoly that owns the National Grid and get Ofgem to actually do the job they advertise. You see, they state, we work to protect energy consumers, especially vulnerable people, by ensuring they are treated fairly and benefit from a cleaner, greener environment. Maybe one of them can explain how turning off the wind turbines in Cornwall because they generate too much electricity and replacing the electricity they used to produce with gas-fired turbines in the north of England, how that is helping to achieve that. Off gem. You're already being regarded of as much use as Ofwat. Yeah, them that seem not to notice that the water utilities were pumping billions and billions of tons of raw sewage into our rivers, lakes and seas. That's hundreds, millions of hours a year, year after year, in direct breach of the law. And you just found out. Well, let's get the virtual portfolio started. To remind you, this is virtual, which means no money changes hands. It is for a bit of fun, a challenge. You can neither gain nor lose. It is pure fantasy, but the portfolio acts as if it was real. I already use eToro as a trading platform, and since they operate a virtual portfolio, it's easy for me to use this one, but other trading platforms will do fine. Well, my initial virtual investment is exactly £10,000. This sometimes causes confusion because many of the shares are priced in dollars, but it doesn't matter. You can switch back and forth quite easily, and many show both currencies. The idea of this portfolio is to run it for at least a year. Investments will therefore be based on future potential, not what might happen today. This differs dramatically from day trading, where investors try to spot shares that will change during a single trading session. We'll look at the market with the total turmoil that we see today from tariffs and the massive losses recently experienced in the markets. All the markets are down, and therefore, at some point, they could and should go back up. That's looking on the positive side. The hardest hit appear to be the shares that deal with companies abroad that export into the US, so my first choice is to keep away from them until the tariffs upset settles down. Upset, that's much too mild a word. Anyway, dealing with all things EV, that makes Chinese company look rather favourite. Many are not yet available to trade on the main markets, the Western markets, so ignoring very recent changes, NIO is a company that has caught my attention for being in the news recently. They're doing a load of things, but one of the things they're doing is forming a partnership with CATL, the giant battery manufacturer, to expand their battery swap technology, and they'll be installing battery swap stations in the UK later this year. They have several new models, plenty more in the pipeline. And with the UK not joining in with tariffs yet, aimed at China, and with Europe seeming to get closer to a deal that might remove specific tariffs aimed at China, Chinese cars here are possibly in for a bit of a boom time. So I'm going against expert consensus. I think this share could soon be about to grow back to where it's spent much of the last few years. To me, this is the first share to buy, and I'm going to invest $1,000. And this shows up as 277.7778 shares at $3.59.99 per share, totaling, back in proper money, 750 quid and 65 pence. Well, last week we travelled to Everything Electric show, so no news round, but I did start my portfolio before we went on the 15th of April. That initial investment today, 24th of April, has grown by £98 and 3p. So week by week, I will report how my virtual shares are doing and expand my virtual portfolio and explain why for each one until the full £10,000 has been invested. However, you need to be aware the figures will look strange because over that time, the value of the dollar might vary against the pound, as will the price of the shares and the profits and everything else. So I now have £9,249.35 left and £98 profit, and I'm on the lookout for my next buy. Full update next week. I hope you join in. On the social media scene, things are fairly quiet, so a bit of fun can be had. Tariffs have become such a serious and divisive topic, so I thought a bit of history and comedy might break the ice. We in the British Empire, we once owned America, but the Americans decided they'd be better off as independent. And the trigger for the American War of Independence, 1775, was that they refused to pay the UK tariffs on tea, and that led directly to the infamous Boston Tea Party. What goes around comes around. Well, the media Also had a field day when a car caught fire in Gatwick Airport car park, and images and reports of EVs catching fire swamped social media until the real cause was found. Investigators now know it was a VW, it was a hybrid, and as Bart Simpson reminds us, a hybrid is not an electric vehicle. Duh. I'm Dave.